All right, so bell ringer, just going over it now. Sorry, I forgot to start the video. So what is a hypothesis? Describe Emily Rose's experiment. What was her hypothesis? So hypothesis is like an educated guess, if-then statement. Okay, and I just gave the example. If you study more, if you engage in class, if you write more notes down, then your grade will probably improve, right? It'll improve. So we all kind of know that that is accurate, that is right. Got to go through the scientific method to prove it, but that is a kind of a good formulated hypothesis. So describe Emily Rose's experiment. What do you got here, Sarah?
I said that she had the therapeutic touch specialist essentially blindfolded so that they can see their own hands.
Good.
Underneath like a, I don't know, piece of cardboard and a towel.
Yeah.
And she held her hand over theirs and would ask them which hand she sensed human energy.
Yeah.
Or whatever, male or female. If they sensed human energy and recorded her observations, I guess, the data compared to see if it was at a rate greater than 50%.
Good job. Good job. So I believe her hypothesis was if the therapeutic touch practitioner could not see which hand, well, Emily was floating over, then their likelihood of answering if it's over to left or right was less than 50%, right? Okay, that was her hypothesis. And she proved it, right? She went through her study, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how randomization is included with that through the flip of a coin. And then we'll talk about her independent and her dependent variable on describing, her hypothesis and trying to prove it. So yeah, that was her study in a nutshell. And for many of these people that are therapeutic touch practitioners, I feel bad for them in a way, I guess, right? They're proven wrong that they couldn't detect the energy field from her simple study, her simple experiment. And I thought that was pretty interesting. All right, so that's a hypothesis. That's her experiment. Moving on now. So how about I give you a couple minutes to work on vocab? Is anybody done with it? Sarah, you done?
Yeah, I just want to get out of the way so I don't forget it.
Oh, there you go. Okay. What about you, Campbell? Booker, you done? No? Hannah, you done? All right, how about I give you 2 minutes yet to work on it so you guys can just chill out for 2 minutes and then we'll move on. Move on with today. Good. Glad you're finished. Glad you're all finished. Oh, throwing binders around.
Yeah.
Look out. We get moving out. 11:20. Got 2 minutes. Well, a minute and a half. So you're gonna have to bundle up today, I guess, to do your run. Good for you, Sarah. I don't know if I could run outside like this.
It gets hot enough when you're running that it doesn't matter how cold it is.
Yeah, that's true. When I was in high school, losing weight for wrestling, I was like, oh, I have practice, and I come home, I eat something. It's like, well, I better go run that off now. And it always would stink running in this cold weather. Ugh. I would make sure I bundle up a lot so I can get an extra sweat going. Maybe put a sauna suit on.
Garbage bags.
Yeah, garbage bags. Fun times. Ugh, fun times. Not really. All right, so finish up the one you're on. We'll move on, and I'll make sure you have some time to work on your activity for today, so you don't have homework then. So you can make your run without worrying about any homework later, hanging over your head. All right, so before we move on here, we talked about Emily Rose's experiment with her hypothesis. Okay, what about Clever Hans? What about Funk's hypothesis? Do you guys remember that? What was his case study? What was his hypothesis? What was his if-then statement? What was his prediction? What was his educated guess? What do you got, Sarah?
For which one?
For Clever Hans.
For Funk's?
Yeah, for Funk. Sorry about that. So how is he going to...
If the owner is removed, the person will be able to.
Awesome, good work. So if the horse trainer, Von Austin, right, if he was removed from Clever Hans's eyesight, then Clever Hans couldn't do math, right? And I think he also added to it, it's like if Von Austin didn't know the math problem, right, then Clever Hans couldn't answer the question right either. Right? So that was his statement. That was his hypothesis. And we already know with Emily Rosa, if the therapeutic touch practitioner can't see which hand she's hovering over top of, then there's less likely chance, less than 50%, that they'll answer that what hand she's hovering over. So that's the hypothesis for both of those. Whenever this wants to work, there we go. Of the case studies that we talked about with Clever Hans and Emily Rosa, obviously these are visualization. If they can't see or understand, well, if they just can't see or visualize it, then they can't fully guess or fully answer the question that is presented to them. So I think these case studies are pretty interesting when talking about scientific method. All right, so number one, we talked about hypothesis. We talked about how we are describing and moving into explanation with the hypothesis and prediction in a way, with predicting the results of what might happen. So number two, perform a controlled test. So we all know the hypothesis must go through some of these rigorous tests. Okay, it must go through a experiment to be proven, to be shown that this hypothesis is correct and we can accept it as a rightful prediction, to move it on to maybe a theory. Okay, so once that hypothesis is proven and through the experimentation, then we can prove it as a theory. Then we can give it that justification as a theory. All right, so to make a test controlled, one must account for the independent variable. So the independent variable is something that is changed or altered by the experimenter in a test or an experiment. Okay, so what do you think the independent variable would be? Something that Emily Rosa changed within her experiment. What did she change? What was her independent variable? So real quick, independent variable is just something that is changed or altered by the experimenter. So in this case, altered by Emily Rosa. So what do you think the independent variable would be for Emily Rosa? What do you think? What do you think, Sarah?
The therapeutic touch practitioner's ability to see what's happening.
Okay, all right. So she already started the experiment off, though, with the cardboard and the towel, right? So that she couldn't see her hands, which, she was elevating over. So
I was just thinking, I mean, are you referencing like between left and right? Is that what you're
exactly, yeah.
Because I would guess, well, that's kind of what I was thinking, but I feel like as far as the whole experiment goes, yeah, that is what changed. But that doesn't 100% correct when you're on the right.
Yeah.
I think that would be
for the independent variable?
Yeah, that's just because that's what's causing the differentiating. But she's also not testing with them being able to see. So
yeah. So the whole time, that barrier is in front of them, so they can't see her even. Like they couldn't even see her or what hand is over. So that's going to be a constant variable, right? So that's going to be constantly there, present for her test. So the independent variable, something that she changes, would be either she's hovering over the left or the right hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I get that, but I don't think that independent variable would derive any specific dependent, like nothing changes as a result of that. That was my mindset. It's not more or less like that. I don't know. That was just because her ability to see is what changes.
No, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess if she's not testing, that would confuse me. If she's not also performing, like, tell me what you feel when I do this or that.
Yeah.
So it's like,
No, I understand.
That's just my thought. Is like, it doesn't change. Like, it's less than 50% both ways, so there's no like direct change as a result of changing one hand.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah. But for her study, the independent variable that changes constantly. So, like you said, it could be maybe she hovers over her left hand several times before she had it. But that's where randomization comes in. So, sure, randomization is going to be a flip of a coin. So, I'm getting ahead of myself here with it. But so, with the independent variable in her study, it would be either she's floating over the left or the right hand. So, it changes depending on the randomization, depending on the coin flip. Right, so that's how she's changing. I guess you could say her variable to make sure that it's not predictable, so that it can know, that they can't guess what's happening. Right, so the independent variable, something that changes altered by the experimenter, is whether she's floating over the left or the right hand. What about with Clever Hans? What do you think with that study? With Funkst, what is changing independently in that study? Campbell, what do you think?
Like whether the person who trained them or not.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So whether or not the examiner's there, or if, obviously if he can see the examiner. So in some cases, I think Funk Steven said, let's put blinders on Clever Hans. So in that case, it's like whether or not Clever Hans can see the horse examiner. So we can either totally remove him from the picture, or we could just put blinders on Clever Hans. So the independent variable that's changing is whether or not he can see von Austin, or whether he cannot see von Austin. So good job. So that's changing in his experiment. That's it changing within his study. Okay, it's a constant change that is manipulated by the experimenter. Okay, that's manipulated by the experimenter. You guys good with that? So with the hypothesis, the independent variable is usually always followed by the if statement. So I always say if-then statement for a hypothesis. So with this study, if independent variable, right? The independent variable always follows that if statement. So if Emily Rosa, right? If she obviously causes this randomization, if they can't visualize, if they can't see, right, which hand she's floating over, depending on left or right, okay, then result dependent variable, which we're going to get to here soon. All right, so this is explaining it. I already kind of went over it with these independent variables for Emily Rosa's and Clever Hans. So I already went over that already. Are we good with it? You guys understand independent variable with it, these two studies? All right, good. All right, so eliminating patterns. So with Emily Rosa, she could have had a pattern maybe she was doing. Maybe she could have said, okay, at one point, I'm going to float over the left hand, and then the very next question, I'm going to float over the right hand. And she could continue to do that, right? Obviously, to try to eliminate any type of bias to make sure that these practitioners aren't catching on to whether or not she just has a pattern of when she floats over the hands, she does randomization. She does that with a flip of a coin, okay? So obviously heads or tails. There's a 50-50 shot. It's going to be heads or tails, and whether or not she's going to be floating over the left or right hand. So that's how she performs randomization, Emily Rosa, with a therapeutic touch. She flips a coin. She flips a coin. And that obviously alters the independent variable depending on if she's floating over the left or the right hand. Okay. In a way, I guess it would alter the dependent variable, the measured amount. Okay, how they're going to be describing it or how they're answering that question. What do you think the randomization is for Clever Hans? What do you think? How do you think Funks is going to use randomization with his study with Clever Hans? What do you think, Booker?
It's like maybe
All right, yeah, good job, good job. That's probably the best way. So changing the math problems. So making sure that there isn't a pattern with when he's asking these math problems, so that maybe Clever Hans could pick up on it, or maybe Von Austin can pick up on it. So he's just not going to go in order like 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? He's not going to go 2 plus 3, 2 plus 4, 2 plus 5, right? He's going to just make sure that these questions are all randomized. Make sure that Clever Hans can't pick up on a pattern to make sure that, obviously, to eliminate any type of bias. Does that make sense? Okay, good. And that's obviously what I just described here with Von Austin and Emily Rose's experiment. All right, so the next thing we got to do is gather data, right? And that's where the dependent variable falls into play. All right, so we just talked about independent variable. So something that has changed by the experimenter. So always follow that if statement, right? Okay, and then the then statement is going to be the measured amount, the dependent variable. So real quick, gathering objective data, that's number 3. Okay, so number 1, hypothesis. 2, controlled experiment. 3, gathering objective data. And that's where the dependent variable falls into play. So this is the measured outcome of a study, or the response, right? Or the response. So what do you think the dependent variable may be in Emily Rose's experiment? What do you think? Hannah, what do you think? What do you think the dependent variable would be the measured outcome? How is Emily Rose going to gather this data? You don't know? You need help? What do you think, Sarah?
I'm trying to think, like, if you're applying that independent variable, changing between left and right. I know she's testing for to see whether or not they will actually know. But I guess based off the randomization, will they be able to, their ability, the dependent variables, their ability to detect human, I don't know, essence, I guess.
I think you're overthinking it. So what do you think the dependent variable, what do you think the response would be? I kind of gave red.
Over switching between left and right?
Yeah, like how is she going to try to measure this study? How is she going to try to measure the independent variable within her study?
Percentage of correctness, is that what you're
What's up, Boomer? No. So you guys are, I think you're just overthinking a little bit too much. So again, it's just your response, right? It's the measured outcome. So I kind of just gave it away. It's just a response. So how they respond to it. So the practitioner can either say what? Left or right, right? Okay, that's the dependent variable. Guessing and really just their response to which hand she's floating over top of. All right, so that's the dependent variable in that study. Okay, what about with Clever Hans? What do you think the dependent variable is with that study? What do you think, Campbell? Okay, right. Yeah, just the response, right? The hoof. Whenever Clever Hans would pick up his hoof and slam it off the ground, his response to the questions. Okay, how Clever Hans responded to it. Okay, that's the measured outcome, the dependent variable. All right, so a good way to remember it, independent variable is the stimulus or cause, right? The stimulus or cause. So again, Emily Rosa, she's going to be either floating over the left or right hand, and that's what she's changing. That's what she is, I guess you could say, showing as a constant change. Dependent variable is a response or the effect, how the person that's being studied, how they respond to that stimulus, how they respond to that effect or that cause, sorry, and how they respond to the independent variable. So an independent variable is something that the experimenter changes or alters. Dependent variable is just the response. It's the measured outcome. Some cases you won't see an if-then statement, which you're going to see with the activity I have. So it's going to be a little harder to find that independent dependent variable. But as long as you know and understand that the independent variable is something changed by the experimenter, something that is a stimulus, an effect, right? Or a cause, sorry. And we know the dependent variable is something that we can measure, that we can understand as a response, an effect. All right, so last thing I want to go over is a confounding variable. What do you think a confounding variable is? What do you think? Campbell, what do you think a confounding variable is?
I don't know. Maybe like something that like doesn't really like impact the result. It's just there. That's just because.
No, that's fine, yeah. In some ways, it could alter your results, right? It's a variable that you're not looking for, that you're not looking to change, like an independent variable. It's not a measured outcome. It's something that could alter your experiment, alter your study, and just really give you data that you're not looking for. That could really just cause an almost like a failure for your experiment. So confounding variable, plain and simple, is just an unwanted influence, okay? An outcome of an experiment. So this is an unwanted outcome that might happen or might occur when you're conducting an experiment. So this could cause an issue or disruption with your dependent variable, what you're trying to measure. So it might be something, let's say, I don't know, if you're going to try to detect light, you know how moths attracted to light, okay, bugs attracted to light. So let's say you're trying to have a controlled experiment, you're using just a flashlight, let's say, and you're seeing how these bugs would attract to the light. Okay, one thing that could cause a disruption in your study is, let's say you leave the blinds open, right? And the window, the sunlight coming through the window, that bug might fly right towards the window rather than the flashlight that you have present. Okay, so that could be a confounding variable. That might skew your results, might skew your data, because that moth, that bug, let's say, is going directed right towards the window rather than the flashlight that you have, okay, that you have pointed at a wall or the ceiling. Does that make sense? Confounding variable. You guys good with that? Sarah, you good?
Yeah.
Okay. So independent variable, dependent variable, and confounding variable. That's what I just wanted to go over for today. All right, any questions? Good? All right, so I'm going to put up this activity for you. You can work on that now. If you have any questions, please ask me.